Invisible. That's what Richard Brooks became the moment he donned a cleaner's uniform at his son's multi-billion-dollar tech company. At 68, the ex-military veteran with silver hair had transformed into just the janitor. Someone executives walked past without a glance, spoke freely around, and occasionally humiliated for sport. Perfect. Because while Alan Winters and Vanessa Carter were busy stealing millions and plotting to overthrow CEO C.J. Brooks, they never noticed the quiet man emptying their trash bins was meticulously documenting every cruel word, every falsified document, every whispered scheme. They mocked the old man without realizing he was C.J.'s father, the very founder of the company they were destroying. Richard had built an empire once with his bare hands. Now, armed with only a mop and unshakable dignity, he would save it again. By proving that sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Charles C.J. Brooks adjusted his tie as he stepped onto the gleaming stage of the National Business Leadership Conference. The spotlights cast a golden halo around him, and from the audience's perspective, he embodied success itself. At 43, C.J. had transformed his father's modest cleaning business into Brooks Global Inc., a tech empire valued at billions. Leadership isn't just about vision, C.J. said, his deep voice carrying through the packed auditorium. It's about creating a culture where everyone thrives. The crowd erupted in applause. Camera flashes popped like lightning, but behind his practiced smile, C.J.'s eyes held a distant worry. Something felt off. Had for months now. As he continued his speech about corporate culture and inclusivity, a strange hollowness echoed inside him. Later, in the green room, C.J. loosened his tie and sank into a leather chair. His assistant Lydia handed him a bottle of water. "Another home run, boss," she said, but paused when she noticed his expression. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," C.J. replied, though it wasn't true. The disconnect between his public message and what he sensed was happening inside his company gnawed at him. Back at his penthouse office, C.J. scrolled through his emails absently when a new message appeared in his private inbox. The subject line made him sit up straight. "You have snakes in your company." He clicked it open, pulse quickening. "Mr. Brooks, your company is rotting from within. Employees are being mistreated, money is disappearing, and those you trust the most are the ones holding the knives. This isn't disgruntled employee talk. This is someone who cares about what you built. Look closer." The message was unsigned. C.J. stared at the screen, feeling a chill despite the warm office. He'd had suspicions, falling morale, increasing turnover, projects missing deadlines, but nothing concrete. Over the next 3 days, C.J. quietly reviewed internal reports. Employee satisfaction scores. Excellent. Financial audits. Perfect. Productivity. Metrics. Impressive. Yet something felt manufactured about it all. Too perfect. Too clean. On Friday evening, C.J. drove to the outskirts of the city, where a sprawling colonial home stood back from the road. His childhood home, now his father's sanctuary since retiring. As C.J.'s Bentley crunched over the gravel driveway, he spotted his father on the porch, reading a book in the fading light. Richard Brooks, at 68, still carried himself with military precision. His hair had gone silver, but his back remained straight, his handshake firm, and his mind sharp as ever. After his military career, Richard had built a small but successful cleaning business that put C.J. through college. When C.J. took over at 25, Richard had stepped back, proud to watch his son's vision expand the company. "You look troubled, son," Richard said after they settled in his study. No small talk, no preamble, typical of his father. C.J. swirled his glass of bourbon. "Something's wrong at the company, Dad. I can feel it. Numbers don't add up. That's just it. They do. Too perfectly. But we've lost good people. Morale seems off when I walk the floors. And I got this anonymous email." He showed Richard the message on his phone. Richard read it twice, then set the phone down. "What does your gut tell you?" "That it's true." but I can't figure out who or what. The executive team shows me data saying everything's fine. Richard listened as CJ vented his frustrations for nearly an hour, about how distant he felt from the company culture, about his suspicions regarding certain executives, about his fear that he'd grown too removed from the daily reality of his own business. When CJ finally fell silent, Richard took a long sip of his drink. "Son, when you want the truth, you don't look from above. You go down there yourself. I can't exactly walk around unrecognized. My face is on the damn lobby wall." Richard set down his glass. "But I can." CJ frowned. "What do you mean?" "Let me go in. Undercover. As a cleaner." "Dad, you're old?" Richard laughed. "I started cleaning buildings when I was 16. Did it after the military before building the business. I still remember how to push a mop." "That's not what I meant. Nobody sees cleaners, CJ. They're invisible. When I owned the cleaning company, my staff would tell me things they overheard, while emptying trash cans beside executives who spoke as if no one was there. Let me be your eyes and ears where you can't go." CJ considered it. His father was right. Office cleaners moved through spaces largely unnoticed, present but unseen. It was genius, really, but also risky. "You sure about this, Dad?" "It's minimum wage work. Long hours. On your feet." Richard's eyes took on the steely look CJ recognized from childhood. "Son, I've crawled through mud under live fire. I think I can handle emptying some trash cans to help you save what we built." 3 days later, CJ met with Patricia Wilson, an HR associate who'd been with the company since CJ took over, one of the few people he still trusted implicitly. "This is unusual, CJ," Patricia said when he explained the plan in his private office. "White noise machines running to prevent eavesdropping. But I understand. I've seen changes too. Not good ones. So you'll help?" "I'll create the paperwork for a new part-time night cleaner named Richard Johnson. Use your father's first name but a different last name. Keep it simple so he doesn't slip up. I'll mark the file confidential. Only I'll handle his onboarding." "No background check, obviously." Patricia nodded. "I'll bypass the system. And I won't tell anyone. Not even my staff." "One more thing," CJ added. "Make sure he's assigned to the executive floor at least twice weekly." The transformation was remarkable. Richard trimmed his usual neat haircut into an uneven hack job. He grew out 3 days of scraggly white stubble. He practiced walking with a slight limp. Old football injury, he'd tell anyone who asked. He found horn-rimmed glasses at a thrift store and wore them low on his nose. Most importantly, he practiced the art of invisibility. The downcast eyes, the deferential posture, the quiet movements of someone who didn't want to disturb the important people. "How do I look?" Richard asked, modeling his ill-fitting gray custodial uniform in CJ's living room. "Like someone I'd walk past without noticing," CJ admitted, feeling a twist of shame at his own honesty. Richard smiled. "Perfect." On his first night, Richard arrived at Brooks Global Inc. at 10 p.m., carrying a battered thermos. The gleaming glass tower jutted into the night sky, its upper floors still lit with late workers. Richard had only visited a few times, since CJ moved headquarters, and never through the service entrance. A tired security guard barely glanced at Richard's newly issued ID badge. "New guy, huh?" He passed Richard a clipboard. "Sign in. Supplies are on basement level 2. Dave will show you your card en route." Dave turned out to be a heavyset man in his 50s who spoke in grunts and sighs. He walked Richard through the basement supply area, industrial cleaners, mops, trash bags, vacuum cleaners. "You're on rotation. Tonight you got floors 18 through 20. That's executive. They're messy but don't like being disturbed. Vacuum last, bathrooms first. Empty all trash. Replace liners. Spot clean glass. Don't touch desks unless there's a coffee ring. Don't bump into nothing expensive. Questions?" Richard shook his head. "Good. You got 6 hours to finish 3 floors. Clock's ticking." Dave handed him a cleaning cart and walked away. The executive floors were opulent compared to the utilitarian basement. Plush carpets, wood paneling, original artwork. Richard pushed his cart quietly, taking mental notes of the layout. he spotted CJ's corner office, dark now with its magnificent view of the city. As Richard began his rounds, he quickly noticed something that saddened him. Not a single late-working executive acknowledged his presence. They walked past as if he were a piece of furniture. When he entered offices to empty trash, conversations stopped until he left, then resumed as if he'd never been there. At midnight, Richard was cleaning the glass walls of a conference room when he heard raised voices. A woman emerged from an office berating a young janitor. "How many times do I have to tell you? These doors need to be spotless. I can see fingerprints everywhere. Do you think our clients want to see that?" The janitor, a young man who looked barely 20, kept his head down. "Sorry, Miss Carter, I'll do it again." "Yes, you will. And if I see another smudge tomorrow, we'll need to review your performance." The woman turned sharply, her heels clicking on the marble flooring. As she walked away, a tall man in an expensive suit emerged from another office. "Trouble with the help again, Vanessa?" The woman, Vanessa Carter, Richard presumed, rolled her eyes. "The cleaning staff is completely incompetent, Alan. I've complained to facilities repeatedly." Alan laughed. "Well, you get what you pay for, right? Speaking of which, join me for a drink in my office. I want to run something by you before tomorrow's leadership meeting." As they walked away, Richard noticed the contempt in their expressions, the casual cruelty in their tones. He committed their faces to memory, Vanessa Carter and Alan. He'd need to learn more about them. By the end of his shift, Richard's back ached, his hands were raw, and his feet throbbed. But his mind was racing with observations. As he drove home in his modest sedan, not the luxury car he actually owned, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His son's company was indeed in trouble, but not from anything that would show up on a financial report. The problem was the culture, and Richard was just beginning to see how deep the rot went. Richard's first week as a cleaner at Brooks Global passed in a blur of observations and quiet note-taking. Each night he'd return to his home and record everything in a secure digital journal for CJ. The pattern was becoming clear. Vanessa Carter, the HR manager, ruled through fear, while Alan Winters, the COO and CJ's supposed childhood friend, enabled and participated in the toxic culture. On Monday, Richard watched Vanessa publicly dress down a marketing coordinator for using the wrong font in a presentation. The young woman nearly burst into tears. "This isn't kindergarten," Vanessa had snapped. "This is a billion-dollar company. Do better or find somewhere that appreciates mediocrity." Later that same day, Richard overheard Alan mocking the same coordinator to other executives. "Did you see her face? Priceless. Some people just can't handle the pressure of real business." By Wednesday, Richard had mapped the social hierarchy of the executive floor. Those in Alan and Vanessa's inner circle enjoyed privileges, praise, and protection. Those outside it were targets, constantly walking on eggshells. Richard was emptying trash in the reception area late Thursday when he noticed a young woman at the front desk. Unlike most employees he'd encountered, she smiled at him. "Would you like some coffee?" "The pot's still half full and they'll just dump it anyway," she offered. Richard was touched by the simple kindness. "That'd be nice. Thank you, Miss Trina." "I'm the night receptionist." She poured him a cup. "You're new, right? Started last week?" "Rick," he said, using his cover name. "Yeah, just started. Still learning the ropes." Trina lowered her voice. "Word of advice? When you clean the executive floor, try to be invisible around Ms. Carter and Mr. Winters. They can make your life miserable." Richard nodded. "Already noticed. They're not big on respect." "Tell me about it." Trina glanced around to make sure. No one was listening. "I'm a single mom. Can't afford to lose this job, so I just keep my head down." Over the next few nights, Richard noticed Trina was always kind. Not just to him, but to everyone. She remembered people's names, asked about their families, kept a small drawer of granola bars for coworkers who skipped meals. Richard also began noticing other patterns. There was a young man, maybe early 20s, who stayed later than most, in the tech department. Skinny with nervous energy, he always had 3 monitors glowing with code. Unlike the confident swagger of those in Alan's circle, This young man practically hugged the walls when walking the hallways. On Friday night, Richard was mopping near the tech department when he heard Alan's voice. "Still here, huh? What was your name again? Jason?" "Jaden, sir," the young man replied, standing from his desk. "I'm just finishing the security protocol updates you asked for." Alan picked up a tablet from Jaden's desk, glancing at it disinterestedly. "This the new authentication system you've been pushing for?" "Yes, sir. It would add 3 layers of protection while actually making login faster for authorized users. It also has an audit trail that could—" Alan cut him off. "Looks complicated, probably expensive to implement." "Actually, sir, I built it using our existing architecture. It would save money long-term by preventing breaches. The ROI calculation shows—" "Listen, kid, I appreciate enthusiasm, but you've been here what, 3 months? Let the senior team worry about security decisions." Alan set the tablet down dismissively. "Just stick to the assigned tasks, all right?" After Alan left, Richard watched Jaden's shoulders slump. The young man stared at his work, then slowly closed the program and packed up his things. As the second week began, Richard met the maintenance supervisor, Mike Lawson. Mike was checking an air conditioning unit when Richard was cleaning nearby. "Hand me that wrench, would you?" Mike asked, pointing to his toolbox. Richard passed it over, and they fell into easy conversation. Mike was in his late 30s, solidly built, with capable hands and a straightforward manner. "Been here long?" Richard asked. 8 years. Started when they were still in the old building downtown. Mike tightened a bolt. "You're the new night cleaner, right?" "Rick?" "Word travels fast." Mike shrugged. "Small maintenance team. We notice when someone new shows up in the service areas." He closed the AC panel. "Keep your head down, old man. This place has changed, not for the better." Over the next few days, Richard noticed something interesting about Mike. The maintenance supervisor kept a small notebook where he logged repair requests. Some were official work orders, but others were quietly handled off the books. One evening, Richard saw Mike fixing a space heater under a receptionist's desk. Not Trina, but another woman on the day shift. Facilities said they wouldn't replace it, the woman explained. "Budget cuts. My arthritis acts up something terrible without heat." "Don't worry about it, Susan," Mike said kindly. "Got a spare element. Good as new by morning. Just don't tell anyone I did it, all right?" Richard began to realize Mike did this regularly. Quiet fixes, small kindnesses, helping the lower-level staff with repairs when official channels refused. And he never seemed to expect anything in return. On Thursday night, Richard was cleaning the executive conference room when he heard voices approaching. Quickly, he ducked into a supply closet, leaving the door slightly ajar. Alan and Vanessa entered with about 10 others, all senior managers. "Closed-door meeting, people," Alan announced, shutting the conference room door. "What's said here stays here." Richard couldn't see much through the crack, but he could hear clearly. "First order of business," Alan said. "Performance reviews. I've got a list of people I think we need to manage out before the next quarter." "The Clark woman in accounting keeps questioning our expense reports," someone said. Vanessa laughed. "Leave her to me. One more mistake on her timesheet, and she's gone." HR's call, after all. They continued, name after name, plotting ways to force out employees who asked too many questions or weren't team players, meaning they didn't play along with Alan's inner circle. Then the conversation shifted. "Project Omega budget," Alan said. "We're showing a cost of $14 million to the board." "Actual cost is closer to 10, a man's voice replied. "Beautiful," Alan said. "The remaining 4 is our operational contingency fund. Speaking of which, Vanessa, how's the Cayman account looking?" "Healthy," she replied. "The dummy consultant invoices are working perfectly. No one questions my sign-off on HR culture initiatives." Richard felt his blood run cold. They weren't just creating a toxic workplace, they were stealing from the company, from CJ. The realization made him grip the mop handle so tightly his knuckles turned white. After the meeting broke up, Richard waited in the closet until everyone had gone. Then he continued his cleaning rounds, mind racing with what he'd discovered. The next night, Richard was cleaning the hallway outside the break room when Vanessa approached with an expensive coffee from the cafe downstairs. "Excuse me," Richard said politely, moving his cart aside. Vanessa barely glanced at him, typing on her phone as she walked. Suddenly, she turned sharply and collided with Richard. Her coffee splashed across his uniform. "Look what you did," she snapped, though she had clearly walked into him. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Richard said, feeling the hot liquid seep through his shirt. "You should be. This was a $20 coffee." She looked at him with disgust. "God, they really hire anyone these days, don't they?" She walked away without another glance, leaving Richard standing there, coffee dripping from his uniform. From around the corner, he heard a faint laugh. Alan's. That night, Richard sat at his kitchen table, typing everything into his secure journal for CJ. He added names, dates, snippets of conversations. He was building a case piece by piece, and what he was finding went beyond simple workplace toxicity. "They're stealing from you, son," he typed, "and they're creating a culture of fear to cover their tracks. But I've also found good people, people worth fighting for. Trina at reception, Mike in maintenance, a young tech guy named Jaden who keeps getting shut down. There are others too. This company isn't rotten, just some of the leadership." As Richard hit send on the encrypted message, he thought about what he'd seen in just 2 weeks. There was more to uncover, he was certain. The late-night meetings, the mysterious files, the offshore accounts. He was just scratching the surface of the corruption. But Richard Brooks, decorated military veteran and self-made businessman, wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially when it involved his son's legacy. Richard washed his coffee-stained uniform in the sink, hung it to dry, and set his alarm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and he would be ready. 2 weeks into his undercover mission, at Brooks Global, Richard Brooks had established a routine and gathered valuable intelligence. Each night after his shift, he would meticulously document his observations in a secure journal for CJ. The pattern was becoming clear. Alan Winters and Vanessa Carter had systematically created a toxic culture of fear and favoritism. Richard arrived for his Friday evening shift to discover the executive floor transformed for a casual gathering. Soft music played as Brooks Global's upper management mingled with drinks in hand. Richard kept to the periphery, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces while observing the social dynamics. Alan Winters stood at the center of attention, regaling a circle of admirers with a story that had them all laughing too loudly. Richard recognized the behavior. He'd seen it countless times in his military days. Power on display, reinforcing the hierarchy. "Another round," Alan called out, waving his empty glass. "And make sure the good stuff doesn't run out." As Richard quietly cleaned nearby, he noticed Alan watching him with growing interest. Something in Alan's expression shifted, a predatory gleam entering his eyes that Richard immediately recognized as trouble. "Hey, janitor!" Alan called out suddenly, his voice cutting through several conversations. "What's your name again?" Richard looked up slowly, maintaining his persona. "Rick Johnson, sir." Alan approached, drink in hand and several followers in tow. "Rick, right." He looked Richard up and down with undisguised contempt. "How long have you been cleaning up after your betters, Rick?" A hush fell over the nearby groups. Some employees drifted away, uncomfortable with what was developing. Others moved closer, sensing entertainment. "About 3 weeks at Brooks Global, sir," Richard answered calmly. 3 whole weeks, Alan mocked. "And what do you think of our company so far? Impressed with what we've built?" Richard maintained his humble demeanor while choosing his words carefully. "Seems like a successful business." "Seems like a successful business," Alan repeated, turning to his audience with exaggerated surprise. "Our custodian has a grasp of economics, everyone." Nervous laughter rippled through the onlookers. Richard remained silent, recognizing that Alan was looking for a reaction, any sign of anger or humiliation he could exploit. "Tell me, Rick," Alan continued, swirling his drink, "do you actually know what we do here? What Brooks Global actually produces?" "Something with computers, I believe," Richard replied with deliberate vagueness. "Software." This triggered a burst of laughter from Alan and his inner circle. "Something with computers. That's priceless. He turned to a woman beside him. Vanessa, our cleaning staff believes we do something with computers. Vanessa Carter stepped forward, wine glass in hand, and a cold smile on her face. Well, that explains the quality of the cleaning services. Richard absorbed the insult silently, his military training serving him well. He'd endured far worse from drill sergeants and enemy combatants alike. Alan, however, seemed irritated by Richard's composure, the lack of the cowering reaction he'd expected. Hey, old man, Alan said sharply, pointing to a spot on the floor. You missed a spot there. Richard glanced at the perfectly clean section of floor. Looks clean to me, sir. A flicker of anger crossed Alan's face at this mild resistance. I said it's dirty, and I'm management, so I outrank your eyes. He looked to his audience for affirmation, receiving obligatory chuckles. Let me help you see it better, Alan continued, his voice hardening. With a sudden motion, he upended his glass of water directly over Richard's head. Cold water cascaded down Richard's face and neck, soaking into his uniform. Gasps and nervous laughter erupted from the gathered employees. Richard stood perfectly, still, water dripping from his chin, his eyes remaining steady and dignified. There, Alan said triumphantly. Now you definitely have something to clean up. Vanessa quickly pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of Richard, water streaming down his face. Best Cleaner Award, she announced, showing the picture to those nearby, who laughed with varying degrees of enthusiasm. From the corner of his eye, Richard noticed Trina watching in horror, her hand covering her mouth. The receptionist looked devastated but frozen in place, no doubt remembering what she had told Richard about needing her job as a single mother. Mike Lawson stood nearby, his hands clenched into fists, fury evident in his expression. The maintenance supervisor seemed to be calculating the cost of intervention, clearly wanting to step in but recognizing the professional suicide it would represent. Clean yourself up, Alan said dismissively, already turning away. And make sure the bathrooms are spotless before you leave. We pay you for results, not just to stand around getting wet. As attention shifted away from Richard, Trina approached cautiously with paper towels. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her eyes filled with sympathy. He's horrible. It's okay, Richard assured her quietly. Not your fault. But I just stood there. I didn't say anything. You have responsibilities, Richard reminded her. I understand. As Richard dried himself off, Mike managed to approach while pretending to check an air vent. This place is rotten, Rick, he muttered under his breath. They don't respect anyone without a title. Been this way since Alan took over operations. Richard nodded slightly. I'm starting to see that. Some of us are documenting this stuff, Mike continued, keeping his voice low. The harassment, the way they treat people. When the time is right, he trailed off, then shook his head. Just know you're not alone, okay? After his shift ended, Richard retreated to the janitor's closet to change his damp shirt. Alone in the small space, he caught his reflection in a small mirror on the door. Water had plastered his gray hair to his forehead, and his uniform clung uncomfortably to his skin. The image triggered a memory. Himself decades younger, rain-soaked and mud-covered, leading his platoon through a treacherous night mission. He'd earned his first commendation that night, not for heroics but for steady leadership under pressure. Richard straightened his shoulders. This was just another mission. Different stakes, but the same principles applied. Observe, adapt, overcome. Later, that night, in CJ's secure home office, father and son watched the security footage of the water incident together. CJ's expression darkened with each passing moment, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. I'm ending this now, CJ said through clenched teeth. We have enough. I'll fire him Monday morning. Richard shook his head. Not yet. What we have proves he's a bully, but we need more on the financial fraud, the offshore accounts, his whole network. They humiliated you, in front of everyone. They tried, Richard corrected, but I've been shot at by people who actually knew how to aim. Alan Winters doesn't scare me. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Trust me, a little more time, and we'll have everything we need. As they finished their meeting, Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "You okay after tonight? These people have no shame." Richard smiled slightly as he replied, "I'm fine. Had worse in basic training. But thanks for checking." As Richard drove home, his mind replayed a conversation he'd overheard as he was leaving the building. Alan, speaking, in hushed tones on his phone in an empty corridor. "Everything's proceeding as planned. The board presentation is ready. Soon, Brooks Global will belong to us. CJ won't even see it coming." Richard gripped the steering wheel tighter. Whatever Alan and his accomplices were planning, the clock was ticking. The following Monday, Richard arrived at Brooks Global earlier than usual, using an access card CJ had provided to enter through a service door. Tonight's mission was clear. Follow Alan and Vanessa more closely, document their movements, and gather evidence of their scheme. For nearly an hour, Richard moved through the building's maintenance areas, checking in with other workers as if conducting routine inspections. The clipboard he carried and facilities cap pulled low over his eyes provided sufficient cover. At 6:30 p.m., Richard positioned himself near Alan's office, pretending to repair a flickering light in the hallway. From this vantage point, he could observe the COO through the glass wall while remaining partially hidden behind a decorative column. Inside, Alan was engaged in an animated phone conversation, gesturing emphatically while pacing. Though Richard couldn't hear the words, Alan's expression shifted from frustration to smug satisfaction during the call. When Alan left his office, Richard followed at a discreet distance, using his maintenance card as cover. The COO took the elevator to the legal department on the 15th floor, unusual territory for him at this hour. Using his master key, Richard accessed the adjacent file room, which shared a ventilation system with the conference room where Alan had disappeared. Through the vent, Richard could hear voices clearly. "These documents need to be modified before the board meeting," Alan was saying. "The performance metrics for CJ's pet projects are too positive. Adjust them down. Make them look like money." "Pits? That's falsifying company records," a woman's voice responded hesitantly. "That's presenting data in context," Alan countered smoothly. "Look, do you want to make partner or not? This restructuring is happening. You can either be on the winning side or—" "Fine," the woman interrupted. "I'll make the changes. But I want written authorization," Alan laughed. "Of course. I'll have Vanessa draft something on HR letterhead. Very official." An hour later, Richard observed Alan meeting Vanessa in the executive lounge, now empty except for the two of them. Richard positioned himself in the adjacent kitchenette, supposedly cleaning coffee machines while his phone, hidden inside his supply caddy, recorded their conversation. "The legal team is on board," Alan told Vanessa, keeping his voice low. "The board presentation is ready. We're showing CJ's vision initiatives as major financial drains while our offshore operations look like the company's salvation." "And the board will believe that?" Vanessa asked, sipping her wine. "They'll believe the numbers, and the numbers will say whatever we tell them to say." Alan loosened his tie. "Once we trigger the confidence vote, CJ is done. The board will install me as interim CEO. You'll get operations. And within 6 months, we sell to Global Tech for our asking price. And our friends in the Caymans will be very happy with their returns." Alan raised his glass. 2 more weeks, and Brooks Global has new ownership. Richard felt his heart pounding as the full scope of their plan became clear. This wasn't just embezzlement. It was a complete corporate takeover. Alan was falsifying data to convince the board to remove CJ, presumably so they could sell the company for personal profit. As Richard processed this information, a new complication emerged. While backing away from the kitchenette, he bumped into a serving tray, sending silverware clattering to the floor. "What was that?" Vanessa's voice rang out. Richard quickly dropped to his knees, gathering the scattered utensils as Alan appeared in the doorway. "Just the cleaning guy," Alan said dismissively. "Clumsy as usual." Vanessa appeared behind him, eyes narrowing as she recognized Richard. "You again. The water didn't improve your competence, I see." Richard kept his head down. "Sorry about the noise. Almost done here." Alan stepped closer, looming over Richard. "You know, Rick, I've been meaning to ask." Were you anywhere near the executive lounge earlier? Trina mentioned seeing a maintenance worker, but maintenance says they didn't schedule any repairs. Richard felt a chill but kept his expression neutral. Just routine cleaning, sir. Coffee machines get pretty dirty. Alan studied him for a moment longer, suspicion evident in his eyes. Make sure you finish quickly. We're having a private discussion. The next morning, Richard received an urgent text from CJ. They're moving faster than we thought. Board presentation, scheduled for next Friday, not end of month. This accelerated timeline meant Richard had less than 2 weeks to gather conclusive evidence of the conspiracy. He needed allies, and he knew exactly where to start. During his lunch break, Richard found Trina sitting alone in the staff cafeteria, reviewing documents while picking at a salad. Mind if I join you? Richard asked. Trina looked up, surprised but pleased. Rick. Of course. She moved her papers aside. How are you doing after, Just fine, Richard assured her, setting down his lunch. Water dries. Trina lowered her voice. Everyone's talking about it. Some people thought it was funny, but most were disgusted. No one should be treated that way. Has it always been like this? The culture here? Trina sighed. No. It used to be different. When CJ was more involved day to day, there was this energy, this feeling that we were all building something important together. She pushed her salad around with her fork. Then Alan started taking over more operations, and CJ was traveling all the time, and things just changed. How long have you worked here? 4 years. I started as a filing clerk, worked up to reception. The pay is good, and the health insurance is crucial for my daughter's asthma treatments. She looked down. That's why I didn't say anything when Alan. She trailed off. You don't need to explain, Richard said gently. We all have responsibilities. But we should still stand up for what's right, Trina insisted, a flash of determination in her eyes. Some of us have been documenting the harassment, the unfair terminations. Mike mentioned you might be interested in helping. Richard nodded, cautiously. I've seen enough to know something's very wrong here. Trina glanced around before pulling a flash drive from her purse. I work reception. I see everything. Who meets with whom? What documents get couriered out after hours? Which employees get called to HR right before they're fired? She slid the drive across the table. It's all in there. Dates, times, patterns. I just don't know what to do with it. Richard pocketed the drive. Leave that to me. But Trina, be careful. Don't take risks. Too late for that, she said with a sad smile. Last week, Vanessa accused me of stealing office supplies. It was obviously false. They have me on camera the whole time I'm at my desk. But that's how it starts. They build a case before they fire you. Why would they target you? Because I helped Jaden file a formal complaint about workplace bullying, and because I'm not in Alan's fan club. Trina checked her watch. Speaking of Jaden, you should talk to him. He's onto something. With the company's network security. That evening, Richard sought out Jaden in the tech department. The young intern was alone as usual, hunched over his monitors long after most employees had left. Excuse me, Richard said, causing Jaden to jump slightly. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. I'm Rick, from cleaning. Oh, right. The guy, Alan. Jaden trailed off awkwardly. Sorry about that, it was messed up. No apology needed. Richard moved closer, lowering his voice. Trina suggested I talk to you. Said you might have found something in the network. Jaden's eyes widened, then narrowed with suspicion. Why would a janitor care about network security? Richard made a quick decision. Because I'm not just a janitor. I'm gathering evidence of what Alan and Vanessa are doing. Trina trusts me. So does Mike. Jaden studied Richard for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but not here. He grabbed his laptop. Starbucks across the street. 20 minutes. At the coffee shop. Seated in a back corner, Jaden opened his laptop. So I'm an intern, right? Bottom of the food chain. But I'm also a certified ethical hacker with 2 cybersecurity certifications. Brooks Global doesn't know that. They just think I'm a code monkey from State University. And you found something? Jaden nodded, typing rapidly. I've been developing a security protocol that tracks data movement within our systems. Officially, it's to prevent external breaches. Unofficially, it's shown me exactly who's accessing what, when, and where they're sending it. He turned the screen toward Richard. See these data transfers? Every Tuesday night, someone with Alan's credentials accesses our proprietary client information and financial projections, then transmits compressed files to an external server. Could be legitimate business, Richard suggested, playing devil's advocate. To a server registered to a shell company in the Cayman Islands? Jaden raised an eyebrow. And always after regular business hours, with the activity logs manually. Deleted afterward? I'm only seeing this because my protocol captures the activity before it reaches the official logs. Richard leaned forward. Can you document all this? In a way that would stand up to scrutiny? Already am. Jaden pulled up another screen. I'm mirroring everything to a secure external drive. Time-stamped, encrypted, tamper-evident. He paused. But Rick, this is serious corporate espionage, maybe even securities fraud. Who exactly are you working with? Richard chose his words carefully. Someone who cares about this company. Someone with the authority to act on what we find. But I can't say more right now. For your protection as much as anything. Jaden seemed to accept this. I get it. Need to know basis. He closed his laptop. I'm in. But they're moving fast. There's a board meeting next Friday. I think that's when they're making their move. Then we need to move faster, Richard said. The next day, Richard met with Mike Lawson away from the office. They sat in a local diner during Mike's lunch break. I've been collecting evidence for months, Mike confided, sliding a worn notebook across the table. Maintenance requests that get denied for no reason. Safety concerns ignored. Backdated inspection reports. Richard flipped through the notebook, impressed by Mike's detailed documentation. This shows a pattern of negligence. More than that, Mike insisted. It shows intent. They're deliberately running this place into the ground while making it look good on paper. Last month, I was ordered to sign off on fire safety inspections for the server room, even though the suppression system isn't up to code. When I refused, they got someone else to do it. Why haven't you taken this hire? To CJ Brooks himself? Mike sighed. Have you seen anyone get to CJ directly? Alan has him completely insulated. Everything goes through proper channels, which all lead back to Alan or Vanessa. Richard nodded, understanding completely why his son had felt so disconnected from his own company. What made you start keeping records? About a year ago, an employee named Sarah Davis was injured when a ceiling tile fell in her office. She'd reported water damage 3 times, but facilities was ordered to ignore it. Budget cuts, supposedly. After her injury, they doctored the maintenance requests to make it look like she never reported it. Called it user error and fought her workers' comp claim. Mike's jaw tightened. I knew then that this wasn't normal cost-cutting. This was deliberate. And you've kept this quiet all this time? Had to. Got 2 kids in college, mortgage underwater after my wife's medical bills. Mike met Richard's eyes. But I'm ready now. Whatever you're planning, I'm in. By the end of the week, Richard had assembled a small but committed group of allies. Trina, Jaden, Mike, and a handful of others who had suffered under Alan and Vanessa's leadership. Each brought valuable evidence and unique access to different parts of the company. Richard coordinated their efforts carefully, ensuring no one took unnecessary risks. Through Trina, he learned about executive movements and meetings. Through Jaden, he tracked suspicious data transfers. Through Mike, he gained access to areas normally off limits to cleaning staff. The pieces were coming together, but Richard knew they needed something undeniable, something that would make the board's decision immediate and unequivocal. That opportunity came unexpectedly on Thursday night. Richard was cleaning the executive bathroom when Alan and another man entered the adjacent lounge, their voices carrying clearly through the thin wall. The transfer is ready, the unknown man said. Once the board removes CJ, we execute immediately. Global Tech has the paperwork ready. And our compensation? Alan asked. 20 million each for you and Vanessa, distributed through the Cayman account. Untraceable, unreportable. Perfect. And what about the old man, CJ's father? I heard he still owns 5% of the company. The other man laughed. Don't worry about Richard Brooks. Once we ruin CJ, his old man will be cleaning real streets, not just our floors. Richard froze, his heart pounding. They had just confirmed everything. The plot to remove CJ, the sale to Global Tech, the offshore payments. And they had no idea that the old man they were mocking was standing just feet away, recording every word. As Alan and his companion left, Richard pulled out his phone and sent an urgent message to CJ. They're moving faster than we thought. We need to execute now. CJ's response came moments later. Come to the house tonight. Bring everything. It's time. As Richard gathered his cleaning supplies, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at the betrayal his son had suffered, satisfaction at having uncovered the truth, and a grim determination to see justice done. Whatever happened next, Alan Winters and Vanessa Carter were about to learn a painful lesson. Never underestimate a father's love for his son, or a cleaner's ability to uncover your dirtiest secrets. CJ Brooks sat alone in his home office, the only light coming from multiple screens displaying security footage from Brooks Global Inc. For weeks now, this had become his nightly ritual. Watching recordings of his father moving through the company, witnessing firsthand the culture that had developed under his supposedly trusted executives. Tonight, he rewound the footage of Alan Winters pouring water over his father's head for the third time. Each viewing sent a fresh wave of anger through him. CJ paused on his father's face, dignified even in humiliation, eyes steady and unbroken. I should have ended this already, CJ muttered to himself, rubbing his temples. CJ's phone chimed with a text from his assistant. Security delivered another package from R. R was their code for Richard, part of the elaborate security system they'd established to keep their communication private. The package contained another flash drive. Richard had been careful to never send sensitive information electronically. CJ plugged it in and began reviewing the contents. Audio recordings, financial records, documented patterns of harassment. The evidence was mounting, but CJ knew they needed something irrefutable, something that even the board members allied with. Alan couldn't ignore. His father's most recent message suggested they were closer than ever to finding that smoking gun. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Brooks sat in a small 24-hour diner with Ms. Evelyn, an elderly woman who had been cleaning at Brooks Global for nearly 20 years. At 73, Evelyn was the senior member of the cleaning staff, respected by the other cleaners and largely invisible to executives. Been watching you, Rick, Evelyn said, her weathered hands wrapped around a mug of tea. You ain't just cleaning. Richard tensed slightly. What do you mean? You ask too many questions. Watch too carefully. Take too many bathroom breaks with that phone of yours. Evelyn's eyes twinkled. Don't worry. Your secret's safe with me. Whatever you're doing, I hope it works. This place needs fixing. Richard studied her face, then made a decision. What was it like before? When CJ first took over? Evelyn's face softened with nostalgia. That boy had a vision. Treated everyone like they mattered, from the programmers to us cleaners. Used to bring donuts to the night shift sometimes. Knew people's names. She shook her head sadly. Then the company got bigger. He got busier. Started listening to that snake Alan. How did Alan get so much power? Little by little. Started with small things, convincing CJ to let him handle the day-to-day headaches, so CJ could focus on the big picture. Then he brought in Vanessa to run HR. Evelyn's face hardened. That woman's ruined more careers than I can count. Good people forced out, bullied into quitting, or set up to fail. Richard leaned forward. Set up how? They got a whole system. First, they isolate you, change your assignments, move your desk, turn coworkers against you. Then come the write-ups, for things you didn't do, computer glitches that are somehow your fault, missing meetings you were never told about. Evelyn sighed. Seen it happen to dozens of good workers. As they spoke, Richard noticed the time. I should get going. Early day tomorrow. Evelyn reached across the table and patted his hand. Whatever you're planning, be careful. They don't Fight fair. The next evening, Richard arrived at Brooks Global for his shift and immediately sought out Mike Lawson. He found the maintenance supervisor in the basement, working on a heating unit. "Got your message," Richard said, glancing around, to ensure they were alone. "What's so urgent?" Mike wiped his hands on a rag. "Third floor. The heating's out again in the east wing." Richard understood this wasn't about an actual maintenance issue. The third floor housed customer service, lower-level employees who often worked late shifts. Following Mike upstairs, Richard saw several workers huddled in their winter coats, rubbing their hands together as they took customer calls. 58 degrees in here, Mike said quietly. "I reported it 3 times this week. Vanessa denied the maintenance request each time, said it wasn't in the budget." Richard frowned. "Can't you fix it anyway?" "That's why we're here." Mike led him to a supply closet where parts were laid out. "Going to replace the valve myself. Off the books. But I wanted you to see this first." As Mike worked on the heating system, Richard watched the customer service team soldiers on despite the cold. One woman had brought in a small space heater, which she was sharing with 2 colleagues. "That's Trina's sister," Mike explained, nodding toward the woman. "Trina told me she has arthritis in her hands. Can barely type when it's this cold." Richard felt a familiar anger building. Why would they deny the repair? It can't be that expensive. "Control," Mike said simply. "These folks supported the union discussion last year. This is their punishment." As they finished the unauthorized repair, Richard noticed a young man approaching. Jaden, the tech intern. "There you are," Jaden said quietly. "Been looking all over." "What's wrong?" Richard asked, noting the urgency in Jaden's voice. "Not here." Jaden glanced around nervously. "Meet me in server room B in 10 minutes. Use the service elevator." 10 minutes later, Richard slipped into the dimly lit server room where Jaden was waiting. Laptop open. "I've been monitoring Alan's network activity like you asked," Jaden began without preamble. "Tonight, he accessed files from CJ's private server, files he shouldn't have access to. Executive compensation packages, board member profiles, voting histories. Could it be legitimate?" Jaden shook his head. "No way. He used an admin credential that was supposedly deactivated months ago. And look." He turned the screen to show Richard. "He's copying everything to an external drive. This isn't research. It's theft." Richard studied the screen. "Can you tell what he's planning? Based on the files? My guess is he's preparing for the board meeting. Looking for leverage on board members, maybe. Ways to pressure votes." Jaden ran a hand through his hair nervously. "Rick, we need to tell someone. The actual Rick, I mean." Richard put a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "We will, very soon. Just keep tracking his movements. And Jaden, be careful. Don't access anything that would alert him." After leaving Jaden, Richard continued his cleaning rounds, mind racing with this new information. He now had evidence of financial fraud, workplace harassment, and corporate espionage. But he needed to understand the full scope of Alan and Vanessa's plan before making his move. As Richard pushed his cart past the executive conference room, he noticed the light was still on despite the late hour. Carefully, he positioned himself near the door, pretending to clean a nearby water fountain while straining to hear the voices within. "The board is almost completely aligned," Alan was saying. "Thompson is still hesitating, but the financials we're presenting should push him over the edge." "And the offshore accounts?" Vanessa's voice. "Ready. Once the vote passes, we initiate the transfer and announce the global tech acquisition. By this time next week, we'll be celebrating in the Maldives, not cleaning up this mess." Richard's blood ran cold. The timeline was accelerating. Whatever they were planning was happening within days, not weeks. Later that night, Richard observed another troubling scene. Trina was working late at the reception desk when Vanessa approached her. "Still here?" "Dedicated," Vanessa remarked, her tone falsely sweet. "Just finishing up the visitor logs," Trina replied cautiously. "About those logs, there seems to be a discrepancy. Security says an unauthorized visitor accessed the executive floor yesterday, but there's no record in your system." Richard tensed, watching from around the corner. This was a setup. He'd seen it before. That's impossible, Trina said. I log everyone personally. Yet the discrepancy exists. Vanessa's voice hardened. We take security very seriously, Trina, especially with sensitive corporate matters ongoing. I can check the camera footage, Trina offered. If someone came through, we'll handle the investigation, Vanessa cut her off. But consider this an official warning. Another security lapse, and we'll have to re-evaluate your position. After Vanessa left, Richard approached Trina, who was visibly shaken. She's setting me up, Trina whispered. There was no unauthorized visitor. She's trying to build a case to fire me. Why now? Because of the board meeting Friday. I'm scheduled to handle check-in for all board members. Trina's eyes widened with realization. They don't want me there. I know all the board members personally. Some of them might actually talk to me about what's happening. Richard nodded grimly. Can you get backup copies of those visitor logs? Evidence that nothing's missing? Already on it, Trina assured him. I've been keeping duplicate records since Mike warned me about their tactics. The following day, Richard took a calculated risk and arrived at work early, positioning himself in the parking garage where he could observe the executives arriving. He didn't have to wait long before Alan pulled in, followed minutes later by another car Richard didn't recognize. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s emerged. Lawrence Fullerton, according to the U.S. visitor badge he was subsequently issued. Richard recognized the name from company materials, a senior partner at Global Tech, the company allegedly planning to acquire Brooks Global. Using his maintenance badge, Richard followed at a distance as Alan escorted Fullerton to a small conference room off the main executive suite, not the usual meeting spot for official business. Richard stationed himself in an adjacent utility closet where he could hear through the thin wall. The board vote is practically guaranteed, Alan was saying. 7-2, possibly 8-1. CJ won't know what hit him. And the paperwork? Fullerton asked. Ready to execute immediately after the vote. We'll announce the acquisition as a rescue plan. Global Tech stepping in to stabilize Brooks Global after leadership concerns. The share price will drop the moment the vote happens, Fullerton noted. Exactly. We buy at the bottom, merge, and restructure. Your company gets Brooks's technology at a fraction of its value. We get our consulting contracts and exit packages. Richard had heard enough. This wasn't just a corporate takeover, it was a coordinated attack on his son's company, designed to devalue it for personal gain. That night, Richard made his riskiest move yet. After most employees had left, he used the access card CJ had provided to enter Alan's office. He needed hard evidence of the conspiracy, something undeniable. Working quickly, Richard photographed documents on Alan's desk, including what appeared to be draft contracts with Global Tech. He also placed a small recording device underneath Alan's desk, one last attempt to capture damning evidence before they executed their plan. As Richard was finishing, he heard voices approaching. He barely made it into a storage closet before Alan and Vanessa entered the office. Everything's ready, Alan said, shutting the door. Tomorrow's our dry run. Friday's the real thing. The presentation looks convincing, Vanessa replied. CJ's initiatives shown as financial drains, your projects as the only profitable segments. And the best part? It's all technically true. If you look at the data the way we've presented. Alan laughed. The board won't have time to dig deeper before voting. What about after, when they realize? By then the deal is done. We're rich. Global Tech handles the fallout. Alan's voice turned contemplative. You know, I almost feel bad for CJ. He really believed all that crap about building something meaningful, about integrity and innovation. He's weak, Vanessa said dismissively. This company needs someone willing to do whatever it takes. Someone like me. Alan's smug satisfaction was audible. After they left, Richard emerged from hiding, his resolve strengthened. He now understood the full scope of their plan, and how little time remained to stop it. The next morning, Richard met CJ at a secluded location outside the city. He handed over the latest evidence and explained what he'd discovered. They're presenting doctored financial data to the board on Friday, Richard explained. Making your initiatives look like failures while presenting Alan's projects as successes. Then they'll call a confidence vote, remove you as CEO, and sell the company to global tech at a fraction of its value. CJ studied the documents, his expression darkening. And they've been setting this up for months, building a case against me while stealing from the company. He looked up at his father. We have to move now. No more waiting. Richard nodded. I agree. But we need to be smart about this. If we just present financial evidence, they'll claim it was a misunderstanding or accounting differences. We need something that shows their character, something the board can't ignore. Like the water incident, CJ suggested. Exactly, but more. We need to show the pattern of behavior, how they treat people, how they've corrupted the company culture. Richard leaned forward intently. Son, you built Brooks Global on respect and innovation. They've turned it into a place of fear and cruelty. That's the real crime here. CJ's expression hardened with determination. Then that's what we'll show the board. Not just the financial fraud, but the human cost. He checked his watch. I'll call an emergency all-staff town hall for Monday morning. Right, before the board meeting. That gives us the weekend to prepare. Perfect, Richard agreed. One more week undercover. One final piece of evidence to collect. Alan Winters was having an excellent week. The board presentation was ready. The documents for the global tech acquisition were prepared. CJ Brooks remained oblivious to the coup about to unfold. Everything was proceeding perfectly. There was just one small irritant Alan couldn't seem to shake. That stubborn old janitor with the annoyingly dignified bearing. Something about the man bothered Alan. Most employees cowered when Alan flexed his authority. They showed appropriate fear. But this Rick person merely endured, his eyes betraying neither intimidation nor respect. It was insulting. And Alan Winters did not tolerate insults. Friday evening found the executive floor buzzing with activity. Alan had organized another, casual get-together for his inner circle, a celebration of their imminent victory, though only a select few knew the real reason for the festivities. Richard arrived for his shift, aware this might be his last opportunity to gather evidence. Before Monday's confrontation, as he pushed his cleaning cart past the gathering, he noticed several employees glancing his way, then quickly looking away. Something felt off. Alan spotted Richard, and a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Well, if it isn't our favorite cleaner. He approached Richard, drink in hand. Happy Friday, Rick. Enjoying your valuable contribution to our company? Richard responded politely. Just doing my job, sir. Your job. Alan swirled his drink thoughtfully. Tell me, does your job include spying on executives? Sneaking into offices after hours? Planting recording devices? Richard's heart sank. They'd found the device. But he kept his expression neutral. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. Oh, I think you do. Alan's voice hardened. Security found your little toy under my desk this morning. Not very sophisticated, rather disappointing, really. Several employees had gathered to watch the confrontation. Vanessa joined Alan, her smile razor sharp. The question is, Alan continued, who are you working for? A competitor? The press? He stepped closer. Or maybe you're just a disgruntled employee with delusions of whistleblowing? Richard remained silent, calculating his options. His cover was blown, but Alan didn't seem to know his true identity, at least not yet. No answer? Alan raised an eyebrow. Let me make this simple. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. He turned to the onlookers. Let this be a lesson. Corporate espionage will not be tolerated at Brooks Global. A security guard approached, but Richard raised a hand. No need. I know the way out. He turned to leave, but Alan wasn't finished. One more thing, Alan called after him. The COO grabbed a glass of water from a nearby table. You missed a spot. With a dramatic flourish, Alan poured the water over Richard's head for the second time, eliciting gasps and nervous laughter from the crowd. Water dripped down Richard's face and soaked his uniform collar. Clean that up, old man, Alan sneered. Richard slowly wiped his face with his sleeve, then looked Alan directly in the eyes. For the first time, he allowed his military bearing to Show, shoulders squared, chin up, eyes unflinching. "I believe that's your mess, Mr. Winters." The room fell silent at Richard's unexpected dignity. Several employees looked distinctly uncomfortable. Trina watched from the reception desk, her expression horrified. Mike Lawson stood nearby, his hands clenched into fists. "Get him out of here," Alan ordered the security guard, his voice betraying a flash of uncertainty. As Richard was escorted to the elevator, he caught Trina's eye and gave her a barely perceptible nod. She understood the signal. Their contingency plan was now in effect. Hours later, as midnight approached, C.J. Brooks sat in his home office, listening to his father recount the events of the evening. "They found the recording device," Richard explained. "Fired me on the spot." "This changes our timeline," C.J. replied, pacing the room. "They'll be suspicious now. Might accelerate their plans. Or they might think the threat is neutralized." Richard pulled out his phone. "Either way, we've got our final piece of evidence." "The water incident?" Richard nodded. Trina had her phone ready, got the whole thing on video, high definition with audio. He played the clip for CJ, who watched with mounting anger as Alan humiliated his father for the second time. "That's it," CJ said decisively. "No more waiting. We move now." He picked up his phone and sent a text to his assistant. "Operation Clean Sweep is a go. Alert the team." Over the weekend, CJ assembled a crisis team of trusted allies, attorneys, security experts, IT specialists, and loyal executives who had been kept out of the company's daily operations during Alan's reign. They worked around the clock, compiling evidence, preparing legal documents, and coordinating with law enforcement. Richard, meanwhile, activated the network of employees he'd cultivated over the past weeks. Trina secured visitor logs and recorded conversations. Jaden downloaded network activity logs showing Alan's unauthorized access. Mike gathered maintenance, records proving deliberate neglect of employee safety. By Sunday night, everything was in place. CJ sent a company-wide email announcing an emergency all-staff town hall at 9 a.m. Monday, just 2 hours before the board meeting where Alan planned to initiate his takeover. Monday morning arrived with a buzz of anticipation throughout Brooks Global. Employees filled the massive atrium at the heart of the building, speculating about the unusual all-staff meeting. Many hadn't seen CJ in person for months. At precisely 9 a.m., security teams quietly moved into position at key points throughout the building. IT specialists activated protocols that locked down certain systems and revoked specific access credentials. Alan and Vanessa arrived together, looking confident but slightly puzzled by the unexpected gathering. They took positions near the front, where a small stage had been set up with a podium and large screen. At 9:05, a side door opened and Richard walked in, still wearing his cleaner's uniform. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "What's the janitor doing here?" someone whispered loudly enough for others to hear. Alan spotted Richard and frowned. "How did he get back in the building?" "I fired him Friday." Before Vanessa could respond, another door opened, and C.J. Brooks strode in, looking imposing. In a perfectly tailored suit, the crowd fell silent as he took the stage, his expression unreadable. "Good morning, Brooks Global," C.J. began, his deep voice carrying throughout the atrium. "I've been away too long, and for that, I apologize. But today, I'm back to address something critical to our company's future." Alan shifted uncomfortably but maintained his composed expression. "Before we begin," CJ continued, "I'd like to introduce someone special." He gestured toward Richard. "Some of you know him as Rick, the cleaner, but his real name is Richard Brooks, my father." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Alan's face drained of color. Vanessa grabbed the edge of a nearby table for support. "For the past month, my father has been working undercover in our company. Not because I didn't trust you." CJ looked out at the employees. "But because I sensed something was wrong and couldn't see it from where I sit." The large screen behind CJ came to life, showing security footage of Alan pouring water over Richard's head during the first incident. What my father found was disturbing. A culture of fear, harassment, intimidation. The screen changed to show more clips, Vanessa berating employees, Alan mocking staff members, both of them laughing at workers' struggles. But that was just the surface, CJ continued, his voice hardening. Below it, he discovered something far worse. The screen now displayed financial records, email exchanges, and recordings of Alan and Vanessa discussing offshore accounts and their plan to sell Brooks Global. Corporate espionage, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud. CJ's words fell like hammer blows. All orchestrated by people I trusted to help lead this company. Alan stepped forward, his face a mask of indignation. This is absurd. You're taking things out of context. The board has already seen this evidence, CJ interrupted. They've been reviewing it since 6 a.m. In fact, he checked his watch. They should be reaching their decision right about now. On cue, CJ's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then looked directly at Alan and Vanessa. Effective immediately, Alan Winters and Vanessa Carter are terminated from Brooks Global Inc. Their access is revoked. Their company accounts are frozen pending investigation. The atrium erupted in shocked whispers. Security personnel moved toward Alan and Vanessa, who stood frozen in disbelief. You can't do this, Vanessa sputtered. We built this company while you were off playing celebrity CEO. Actually, Ms. Carter, came a new voice from the back of the room. A man in a suit stepped forward, flanked by 2 officers. We have some questions for you as well. He held up a badge. FBI, Financial Crimes Division. We'd like you both to come with us. As security escorted Alan and Vanessa toward the federal agents, Alan locked eyes with Richard one last time. The former COO's face contorted with fury and humiliation, a mirror image of what he had inflicted on others for so long. This isn't over, Brooks, Alan shouted as he was led away. But his threats rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence against him. After they were gone, CJ addressed the stunned employees again. Today marks a new beginning for Brooks Global, a return to our core values of respect, innovation, and integrity. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. I failed you by becoming disconnected from the company culture. That ends now, CJ gestured to Mike Lawson, who looked surprised to be singled out. Mike, your dedication to this company and its people hasn't gone unnoticed. Effective immediately, you're our new head of facilities, with a substantial raise and a seat on the operations committee. Mike stepped forward in shock as applause broke out around him. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. Say you'll help us rebuild, CJ replied with a smile. Next, CJ called Trina forward. For years, Trina has been the heart of our reception area, treating everyone with kindness and respect despite the toxic environment around her. Trina, we'd like you to join our newly restructured HR department, helping to reshape our company culture. Trina's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, unable to speak. And Jaden, CJ continued, your brilliant security protocols not only helped expose this conspiracy, but will protect our company going forward. I'd like to personally mentor you and provide direct funding for your innovations. The young intern looked stunned as colleagues patted him on the back. Finally, CJ turned to his father, who stood quietly watching the proceedings. And Dad, Richard Brooks, the man who built our original company from nothing, then humbled himself to save what we created. CJ's voice cracked slightly. There are no words for what you've done. Richard stepped onto the stage and embraced his son as the employees erupted in applause. When they separated, Richard approached the microphone. I've been a soldier, a business owner, and most recently, a cleaner, Richard began, his voice steady. In every role I've learned that true respect isn't about titles or office size. It's about seeing the humanity in each person, recognizing their dignity. He looked out at the employees. In my time here, I saw both the worst and the best of this company. There are good people here, people worth fighting for. Remember that as you rebuild. As Richard stepped back, CJ addressed the crowd one final time. Today, we start fresh. New leadership, new policies, new culture. The board meeting is now a planning session for our path forward, not a coup. He smiled. Now please return to your departments. There's much work to be done. As the crowd dispersed, buzzing with the morning's revelations, CJ, Richard, and their newly appointed team gathered in what had been Alan's office. It worked, Trina said, still wiping tears from her eyes. I can't believe it actually worked. Justice usually does, Richard replied, when good people stand together. CJ looked at the assembled group. His father, still in cleaner's clothes, Mike in his work boots, Trina in her receptionist outfit, Jaden with his rumpled hair and brilliant mind. These were the true heart of Brooks Global, not the polished executives who'd betrayed him. What happens now? Jaden asked. CJ smiled. Now we rebuild, together. He turned to his father. Starting with a proper office for our new chief ethics officer, if he'll accept the position. Richard raised an eyebrow. Are you sure you want your old man hanging around watching over your shoulder? I can't think of anyone better, CJ replied sincerely. As they left Alan's office, soon to be repurposed as a collaborative space for employees, Richard glanced back at the empty desk where so much corruption had been planned. The snake's den was empty now. The company could begin to heal, and somewhere in the building a cleaner was wiping down windows, visible but unseen. Richard made a mental note to learn that person's name tomorrow. In the new Brooks Global, no one would be invisible again. The news of Alan Winters and Vanessa Carter's arrest spread through Brooks Global like wildfire. Within hours, social media was ablaze with reports of the dramatic confrontation in the company atrium. Business news outlets scrambled to cover the story of the undercover operation led by Richard Brooks, father of billionaire CEO CJ Brooks. 2 days after the arrests, employees arrived at work to find a transformed atmosphere. The oppressive cloud, a fear that had hung over the company, had lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism. Security personnel who had once enforced Alan and Vanessa's strict hierarchies now greeted employees with professional courtesy. The executive floor, previously off limits to most staff, was now accessible to all. In the main lobby, the massive portrait of CJ Brooks that had dominated the wall had been removed. In its place hung a new installation, a mosaic of hundreds of employee photos surrounding the company's revised mission statement: innovation through respect, growth through integrity. CJ had taken temporary residence in a modest office on the 18th floor, keeping his door open throughout the day. He made a point of walking the building daily, reintroducing himself to employees he'd lost touch with during Alan's reign. Prestige. Wednesday morning, CJ called his first executive team meeting, now including Mike Lawson, Trina, and several other employees who had helped expose the corruption. Richard attended as well, having traded his cleaner's uniform for a simple suit, though he still carried himself with the same unassuming dignity. The FBI has formally charged Alan and Vanessa, CJ began, looking around the conference table. Wire fraud, securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Their personal assets have been frozen pending investigation. What about their accomplices? Mike asked. 3 senior managers have been suspended, CJ replied. 2 from finance, 1 from legal. We're reviewing their involvement now. Trina, who had already begun her work with the restructured HR department, opened a folder. We've identified 12 employees who were directly involved in the harassment campaigns against whistleblowers. 4 have resigned already. And Global Tech? Richard inquired. They're claiming they had no knowledge of Alan's illegal activities, CJ said with a skeptical smile. Just a legitimate acquisition interest. Their CEO called me personally to apologize for any misunderstanding. Convenient, Richard remarked dryly. Very, CJ agreed. But the important thing is moving forward. The board has given us complete authority to restructure the company. The meeting continued as they discussed immediate priorities, reviewing all terminations from the past 2 years, auditing finances, establishing new reporting structures, and creating genuine channels for employee feedback. Later that morning, a small crowd gathered in the lobby as police officers escorted Vanessa Carter through the building. She had been allowed to return under supervision to collect personal belongings from her office. Employees watched in silence as the former HR director, handcuffs hidden beneath a blazer, kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. As Vanessa passed the reception desk, she paused briefly, her eyes meeting Trina's. For a moment, the power dynamic that had defined their relationship for years was inverted. Trina, now seated behind what had been Vanessa's desk, looked back with quiet confidence, not triumph, but resolution. Time to go, Ms. Carter, the officer said firmly, guiding her toward the exit. Upstairs, CJ was meeting with a young software engineer named Sarah Davis, the same employee Mike had mentioned who had been injured by a falling ceiling tile and then denied workers' compensation. "I never thought I'd be sitting here," Sarah said, looking around the executive office with wonder. "After my injury, I almost gave up fighting. The medical bills were crushing me, and HR kept denying my claims." "That stops now," CJ assured her. "We're retroactively approving all legitimate workers' comp claims from the past 3 years, and I want to personally apologize for what you experienced." Sarah's eyes widened. "You don't need to apologize, Mr. Brooks. It wasn't your fault." "But it was my company," CJ replied solemnly. "My responsibility. I lost touch with what was happening here, and people suffered for it. That's on me." After Sarah left, Richard entered CJ's office carrying 2 cups of coffee. "That was a good thing you did there," he said, handing a cup to his son. CJ accepted the coffee gratefully. "It's just the beginning. We've got dozens more cases to review. People who were fired for questioning, Alan or Vanessa, others who quit rather than compromise their integrity. One step at a time, son," Richard advised, settling into a chair. "Trust has to be rebuilt gradually." "I know," CJ sighed. "I just can't believe how blind I was. All those reports saying everything was fine while the company culture was rotting from within." "Manipulation is what Alan does best," Richard reminded him. "He isolated you systematically, controlled what information reached you. Classic tactics." CJ nodded, then reached for a folder on his desk. "The board approved our restructuring plan this morning. Every recommendation, no objections." He slid the folder toward his father. "Including your appointment as chief ethics officer. If you're still interested." Richard opened the folder and examined the offer letter. "Are you sure about this? I'm not exactly corporate material." CJ laughed. "After what you just pulled off? Dad, you're exactly what this company needs. Someone who sees everyone from the cleaning staff to the C-suite. Someone who understands that a healthy company isn't just about profit margins." Richard considered the offer thoughtfully. "Part-time," he said finally. 3 days a week. I'm still planning to enjoy my retirement." His eyes twinkled. "And I want a dedicated budget for employee initiatives, not just talk, real resources." "Done." CJ agreed immediately. "Whatever you need." By Friday, the transformation of Brooks Global was in full swing. In the wake of the scandal, employees who had previously kept their heads down were coming forward with ideas, innovations, and suggestions. Jaden, the tech intern who had helped expose Alan's network activities, led a presentation on his security protocol enhancements. "This system creates 3 layers of protection, while actually simplifying the user experience," Jaden explained to a packed conference room, his former nervousness replaced by growing confidence. "And the audit trail component would have flagged Alan's unauthorized access immediately." "How soon can you implement it?" CJ asked from the back of the room. Jaden looked momentarily surprised by the CEO's presence. "With a proper team? 2 weeks for core functions, a month for full deployment." "You'll have whatever resources you need," CJ promised. "This is exactly the kind of innovation we've been missing." After the presentation, CJ approached a side table, where an elderly woman was setting out coffee and pastries. "Ms. Evelyn, isn't it?" he asked, remembering his father's description of the senior cleaner. The woman looked up in surprise. "Yes, sir, that's me." "My father speaks highly of you," CJ said warmly. "Says you kept this place running long before I took over." "Just doing my job, Mr. Brooks," Evelyn replied, though she stood a little straighter at the recognition. "Well, your job is important, and I'd like to recognize that." CJ handed her a small envelope. "We're dedicating the new staff lounge in your name, the Evelyn Washington Lounge, for 20 years of loyal service." Tears welled in the elderly woman's eyes as she accepted the envelope. "I don't know what to say." "Just keep telling it like it is," CJ smiled. "This company needs more truth-tellers like you." Meanwhile, Mike Lawson was conducting his first meeting as head of facilities, addressing his former colleagues with characteristic straightforwardness. "Things are changing, but our priorities remain the same. Keeping this building safe and functional for everyone who works here. Mike explained. "The difference is, now we'll have the budget and authority to do it right. One of the maintenance." Workers raised his hand hesitantly. "Does this mean we can finally fix the heating system on 3? Mike smiled. "Already scheduled for tomorrow. No more budget constraints when it comes to basic working conditions." As the first week of the new Brooks Global drew to a close, CJ called another all-staff meeting. This time, the atmosphere in the atrium was entirely different. Expectant, rather than fearful. Engaged, rather than resigned. "I want to thank everyone for their patience and commitment during this transition," CJ began. "In just 1 week, I've seen extraordinary examples of resilience, innovation, and integrity throughout this company." He gestured to where Richard stood quietly at the side of the stage. "My father taught me long ago that a business is only as good as its people. I lost sight of that lesson, but I won't again." CJ proceeded to outline the concrete changes already implemented. A whistleblower protection program with real teeth, transparent salary bands to ensure fair compensation, a genuine open-door policy for all management, and a commitment to promote, from within, whenever possible. "But most importantly," CJ continued, "we're establishing a company culture where respect isn't just a word on a mission statement. It's how we operate every day, at every level. Where innovation isn't stifled by hierarchy, but encouraged regardless of title or tenure." As the meeting concluded, employees filed out with a renewed sense of purpose. Many stopped to thank Richard, who accepted their gratitude with humble nods and handshakes. "How does it feel?" CJ asked his father as they watched the atrium empty. "Like we've taken the first step on a long road," Richard replied. "But it's a good road." That evening, news broke that would solidify the company's transformation in the public eye. Alan Winters and Vanessa Carter had accepted plea deals, admitting to all charges in exchange for reduced sentences. The story dominated business headlines, with many outlets contrasting the toxic culture they had created with CJ's swift, decisive response. As Richard drove home that night, he reflected on the extraordinary weeks he'd spent as a cleaner in his son's company. The exhaustion and humiliation had been real, but so too had been the profound insights he'd gained. Sometimes the most valuable perspective came from the least prestigious position. He thought of Mike, Trina, Jaden, Ms. Evelyn, and the many other employees who had quietly maintained their integrity despite the corrupting influence around them. They were the true foundation of Brooks Global, not the executives who had betrayed. Richard smiled to himself as he turned onto his street. The company was in good hands now, and not just his son's hands, but the hands of those who had stood up for what was right when it mattered most. 6 months after the dramatic exposure of Alan Winters and Vanessa Carter, Brooks Global Inc. had undergone a remarkable transformation. Quarterly reports showed increasing profitability, employee retention had improved dramatically, and the company's reputation had rebounded beyond all expectations. On a crisp autumn morning, CJ Brooks sat in his office reviewing the latest innovation proposals. He had maintained his promise to be more involved in day-to-day operations, while still providing the visionary leadership that had built the company initially. The balance was challenging, but rewarding. A news alert popped up on CJ's computer screen. Former Brooks Global executives sentenced. He clicked the link to read that Alan Winters had received 8 years in federal prison for securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement. Vanessa Carter had received 5 years. Their offshore accounts had been seized, with the recovered funds being returned to the company. CJ closed the article, feeling not satisfaction but a somber sense of justice. The damage Alan and Vanessa had done went far beyond financial. They had harmed people's lives, careers, and sense of workplace safety. No prison sentence could fully address that. His reflections were interrupted by a knock at the door. Mike Lawson entered, looking more comfortable in his role as head of facilities, though he still wore work boots beneath his business casual attire. "The quarterly safety inspection is complete," Mike reported, handing CJ a tablet. "Every floor is not just up to code, but exceeding requirements." "Excellent work," CJ acknowledged, scrolling through the report. "Any outstanding issues?" "Nothing critical. We've addressed the ventilation concerns on 14, replaced the backup generators, and installed the additional emergency exits you requested. Mike grinned. Amazing what you can accomplish with proper resources. After Mike left, CJ prepared for his next meeting, a quarterly review with Trina, who had flourished in her new HR leadership role. Under her guidance, the department had transformed from an instrument of fear to a genuine resource for employees. Employee satisfaction scores are up 64% from last year, Trina reported, her confidence having grown substantially since her reception desk days. Exit interviews show a 78% decrease in complaints about management, and our new mentorship program has 90% participation from senior staff. That's remarkable progress, CJ acknowledged. What's your assessment of the overall culture now? Trina considered the question thoughtfully. We're not perfect yet. Some divisions still show traces of the old hierarchical thinking, but the foundation is solid now. People feel safe reporting problems. Innovation is being recognized regardless of where it comes from, and there's a genuine sense that everyone's contribution matters. Exactly what we've been working toward. CJ nodded with satisfaction. Later that afternoon, CJ met with Jaden, who had been promoted to head of cybersecurity. The former intern had assembled a talented team that had completely overhauled the company's security infrastructure. Our new system caught 3 attempted breaches last month, Jaden reported proudly, including one that targeted our intellectual property database. Any idea who was behind it? The trail leads back to global tech, believe it or not, Jaden said with a hint of irony. Apparently they're still interested in our technology, just not willing to pay market value for it. CJ shook his head. Some things never change. Great work spotting it. As Jaden left, Richard Brooks arrived for their weekly strategy lunch. At 69, Richard had embraced his part-time role as Chief Ethics Officer with characteristic dedication. He had established an ethics committee with representatives from every department and level of the company, ensuring that all voices could be heard. Ready for some good news? Richard asked as they settled into CJ's private dining room. Always, CJ replied, pouring coffee for them both. The Brooks Scholarship Fund has selected its first recipients, Richard announced. 20 employees' children will receive full college funding, no strings attached. CJ smiled broadly. The scholarship had been Richard's idea, a way to invest directly in employees' families and futures. That's fantastic, Dad. When can we announce it? I was thinking at the company picnic next weekend. Make it a celebration. After lunch, Richard excused himself, mentioning a special project he needed to check on. CJ returned to his afternoon meetings, unaware of what his father had planned. That evening, as most employees were heading home, Richard Brooks slipped into a small storage room and emerged wearing his old cleaner's uniform. It still fit, though he'd had it cleaned and pressed since his undercover days. With a mischievous smile, he grabbed a mop and bucket and headed toward the main lobby. Security guards recognized him immediately, but played along with obvious amusement as Richard began mopping the lobby floor with exaggerated diligence. Several employees did double takes as they passed, recognizing the company's chief ethics officer in his cleaner disguise. "Mr. Brooks, what are you doing?" asked a puzzled young woman from accounting. "Just checking on something," Richard replied, with a wink, continuing his mopping. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered, watching with curiosity and taking discreet photos. Richard noticed with satisfaction that several executives were among those who stopped, including some who had previously ignored cleaners entirely. The real test came when 3 new interns entered the building, heading toward the elevators. They hadn't been with the company during the dramatic events 6 months earlier and wouldn't recognize Richard. As Richard deliberately fumbled with his cleaning supplies, dropping some paper towels near their path, he watched their reactions, carefully. Without hesitation, all 3 interns stopped to help. One picked up the fallen supplies while another steadied the bucket. "Need a hand, sir?" asked the third, a young woman with a genuine smile. "Thank you," Richard said warmly. "Very kind of you all." "No problem at all," replied the intern who had gathered the paper towels. "Have a good evening." As they walked away, Richard felt a profound satisfaction. The culture had indeed changed. not just at the executive level, but throughout the organization. Small acts of kindness and respect had become the norm, not the exception. Later, Richard changed back into his regular clothes and made his way to CJ's office, where his son was wrapping up for the day. "Dad, I thought you'd left hours ago," CJ said, looking up from his computer. "Had a little experiment to run," Richard explained, dropping into a chair with a contented sigh. "Good news. It passed with flying colors." CJ raised an eyebrow. "Do I want to know?" "Probably not," Richard chuckled. "But I can tell you this. We've made real progress. Not just policy changes or public relations moves. Real, cultural change. That's what matters most," CJ agreed, shutting down his computer. "By the way, this was in today's mail." He handed his father an envelope. Richard opened it to find a simple note that read, "Respect earned. Mission accomplished." It was unsigned. "Any idea who sent it?" CJ asked. Richard smiled thoughtfully. "I have my suspicions. Might be the same person who sent that first anonymous warning about snakes in the company. You think it was Mike? Or Trina, maybe?" "Could be," Richard mused. "Or maybe Ms. Evelyn. She sees everything, that one." The next morning, CJ arrived early to find his father's handwritten quote already framed and hanging on his office wall. "True leadership begins when you see everyone." He stood before it for a long moment, reflecting on how close he had come to losing everything that mattered. Not just his company, but the vision and values it had been built upon. That afternoon, Brooks Global hosted a major tech conference in their redesigned atrium. The event showcased Jaden's revolutionary security software, which was now being marketed as a standalone product. Industry leaders and press filled the space as the young developer presented his creation with newfound confidence. This technology wouldn't exist without Brooks Global's commitment to fostering innovation at every level, Jaden explained to enthusiastic applause. "They gave me the resources and mentorship to turn a concept into reality." In another corner of the building, Trina was conducting a workshop on empathy in leadership, a program she had developed based on her experiences. Human resources professionals from other companies listened attentively as she shared practical strategies for creating psychologically safe workplaces. "The old model of fear-based management doesn't just harm employees, it destroys value," Trina explained. "When people are afraid to speak up, innovation dies, problems go unreported, and the best talent leaves." Meanwhile, Mike Lawson settled into his new office on the executive floor. Unlike most of his neighbors, Mike had kept his space deliberately simple: functional furniture, practical storage, and a few family photos. His work boots still sat by the door, a reminder of where he had come from and the knowledge that had earned him his position. As evening approached, CJ took a moment to walk through the building, observing the transformed company his father had helped him reclaim. Employees spoke freely, collaborating across departments without artificial barriers. Laughter could be heard from meeting rooms. People from every level greeted each other by name in the hallways. Near the main entrance, CJ paused to watch a cleaner wiping down the glass doors. For a moment, he saw his father in the man's careful movements, in the dignity of his labor. "Good evening," CJ said warmly. The cleaner looked up, momentarily surprised to be addressed by the CEO. Then he smiled. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks." As CJ walked to his car, he noticed other employees passing the same cleaner. One by one, they offered their own greetings. "Good evening. Have a good night. See you tomorrow." Small gestures, perhaps, but in them, CJ saw the fulfillment of his father's wisdom. A company where everyone was seen, everyone was valued, and respect flowed not from titles but from a shared humanity. The culture they had rebuilt would face new challenges, of course, but its foundation was now unshakable, built on integrity, strengthened by crisis, and sustained by the everyday actions of people who understood that true success came not from power over others, but from bringing out the best in each other. The company had come full circle, returning to its founding principles while evolving into something stronger. And it had all begun with Richard Brooks, a father who cared enough to start over at the bottom, proving that sometimes the clearest view comes from the most humble position. What would you be willing to sacrifice to save something you built with your own hands? And who among us is truly invisible in your world today? If this story of dignity and justice spoke to you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of courage that will make you question everything you thought you knew.